Hey everybody. So today I want to take a kind of a look through the past year of AI coding and development, specifically with Claude, but also with some other products. I just started using the Kiro tool or the Kiro service from Amazon AWS, and then I've also been using Claude Opus 4.5 as well. And so some of my feedback on this, we'll just take a look together. So, a little backstory. It looks like I pulled up Google Doc, and looks like I started this back in May. So I created a. This was back when I was learning about context and things like that, and I wanted to write a. I wanted to write a prompt for building a CRM. I thought, that's a pretty hard thing to build in my industry. So I know a little bit about, website development, software development. I wrote the original ClickBid back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. And I'm probably right in the middle of, who would be a good candidate for vibe coding, agentic coding, because I know enough about software development, infrastructure, DevOps, and tools to know what's happening in the CLIs and the code agent coding. But I also don't know as much as some of my fellow developers who are just really at the top of their game. AI just isn't as meaningful for them, only because it's they already know what they need to know to build the things that they need to build. So anyway, I wanted to just stay aware of it, stay at the forefront. So I wrote this really long prompt, what I wanted it to do, what I wanted it to be back in May, and I thought, all right. So I was actually on a vacation, and I had some time sitting in a hotel room, and so I used Claude. I think it was 3.5 when Claude Code came out around that time, and it built the front end. Of course, there's in a CRM or any kind of SaaS platform, there's a front end, a back end, a data layer, a lot of different pieces to building a good platform. And so I had Claude Code just get busy. I said, just do this. And so that was the big thing when Claude came out, is that it was going to you could give it a really in-depth prompt, give it some guardrails, and watch it work. And then as it worked, as you saw it going off track, it would then, start to, you could pause it, redirect, and so on. So it was definitely an interactive experience. You didn't just turn it on and walk away and then come back and see what it did. So didn't looking back on what it created, it wasn't very effective. I couldn't use it. I couldn't even log in. I couldn't get past some of the basic stuff. And so what I did was I just shelved it. And I was like, all right, well, now I know what Claude can do, and it's kind of hype right now. But, then Sonnet 4.5 came out maybe 2 months ago. I don't know, maybe a month and a half, whatever. Later this late summer, early fall. And I thought, you know what, let's take that Google Doc that I had. I just took it, selected all, copied it, jumped into my terminal, and just went YOLO, and took my prompt, and I just pasted it right into Claude Code, and it got busy. And then it was a lot more hands off that time. I felt like it really understood the prompt a lot better, and it stayed on track. So I felt like the big gain from 3.5 to 4.5 was that Claude could stay focused and not drift, so that all of a sudden you had this feature that was just completely useless, and not only did it have to get torn out, you had to rebuild something else. And so I thought, it was better, and it was doing some things that I thought was pretty cool, but it wasn't. I mean, there was a lot of work that had to be done, and so what I was using Claude for was just to see if is there a place in the industry where people are going to start to get where developers just aren't needed anymore. Are we commoditizing the developer industry? And so I don't like the sound of that. I don't think that's happening, but I don't get to control it. I'm just a bystander in all of this. And so I wanted to stay on top of it and see where we were headed. So thankfully I could come back and say, hey, that's not what's happening. Then, of course, the last, 3 weeks ago, we had Gemini 3, Gemini 3, then OpenAI 4.1, whatever, max, ultimate, Uber, whatever it was. And then Opus 4.5. And so Opus 4.5 is now really, again, it's even better than Sonnet 4.5. So it feels like they're just continuing to ratchet up. And there's a lot of discussion about, is there a plateau? Are we going to hit a ceiling of what an LLM can actually learn? Because at some point we run out of knowledge. And then we have to just start recycling and retuning. So far, we just haven't hit that ceiling. So, and then last week at AWS reInvent, Kiro came out because one bottleneck in no matter how many LLMs, how many versions they come out with is the context window. It's the memory that the AI has when it uses code to build things. When it uses memory to build things from a list or a command that you give it, or a prompt. Like I have a pretty big prompt window, and once it runs out of context, it has to summarize because it's going to start over from scratch. The analogy I always use is like, moving from first shift to second shift. First shift employee gets done, they pack up, they go home. Second shift employee comes in, picks up where first shift left off. Now, unless you're incredibly organized and very procedural and have everything documented to the nth degree, that second shift employee is going to be taking a lot of time to figure out what happened, where they're at, where should they start, what they're doing, and there could be a lot of mistakes. Well, that's how context works in LLMs or in these agentic scenarios where it has to compact a conversation, but whatever it gets rid of is going to be lost. So what Kiro is supposedly doing in the new world of agentic coding is handling the context a lot better. And they're even bragging that it can run for an entire day without interaction. You give it, and on top of that, your prompt. So my CRM prompt doesn't need to be 8 pages long with, conceptualized data tables and data layout and format and stuff like that. It could actually just be a summary statement. So maybe I just give it a summary prompt and it can run with it. Now, of course, I'm pretty skeptical, but I thought, hey, let's kick the tires. I have a prompt that I've been using since May to kind of test these models as we go. So I jumped into Kiro, and I want to go back. I'm done at this point, but I want to go back and say that this started out as an empty folder, nothing in it on my hard drive. If you keep just going back and back and back, in fact, looks like, yeah, there's all of these tasks that it executed. Man, it has everything. That's crazy. Wonder if it even, yeah, here it is. So I just took the prompt and dropped it in. And then it was interesting because what it did do was it created, so in my experience with Claude, it creates these subfolders, these dot folders, dot Claude, and then agents. You can put agents inside of it, so that way you can tell Claude to use agents that are specialized in certain things, and so on. I believe there's even other newer things that I just haven't gotten into, but it created a Kiro subfolder, and then it put my specs, and it created a requirements, tasks, and a design.md file. So I thought this was interesting. So I've got them actually open. So requirements, it created a markdown file of everything that I outlined. So it started by building that. And then it said, hey, take a look at this. And now tell me if you like it. And I read through it. I thought, yeah, it looks good. So if I didn't like it, we could go back and make changes and clean up and things like that. And then from there, it said, okay, cool. Now we're going to turn it into a design. And then it created a design document. And so here's my design document. So this feels very familiar to what we used to do, in spec development. So my job at ClickBid is to develop specs, hand those specs off to the developers. The developers then ask questions. We go back and forth. We're not as formal as a, PRD and, design documents and requirement docs and user stories and things like that. But it really did. In fact, I think the design, so it did. I told it I wanted it to be built on a full API-driven system, so that the front end would just use the API with full API documentation and so on. And so at some point in here, it started building user stories, which I thought was pretty awesome. Apparently, yeah. Property 2, property 3. Okay, so where did we get? Maybe it was in the requirements. Somewhere. Yeah, user stories. So it created user stories and acceptance criteria, and it did a lot of user stories. Looks like 10, yeah, 14 user stories. It was really, really in depth. And these stories, as a user, I want to categorize gifts by payment method and gift type so that I can generate accurate financial reports. So that's not bad. I mean, it really pulled that out of my prompt. So once it finished the design document, it created I gave me a chance. So it stopped and it said, hey, I need you to look at this. And so there were some breakpoints. It wasn't just I dropped in a prompt and walked away, hung out with friends for, 4 hours and came back and it was done. Quite the opposite. I had to actually stayed up late, approving and approving and approving. So I did qualify a little bit, and then it rewrote, and then I said, okay, cool, this is great. And then it created the third document, the tasks.md file, and this was really really cool. This is not something that Claude does. Oh, I should say this too. In Kiro is not it doesn't prioritize a specific model. You pick your model, a lot like GitHub Copilot, or I think Cursor does this too. But you can pick, and it's actually it's very much an Anthropic driven. I don't unless it's just me, but I only get Sonnet 4.5 and Opus 4.5. Those are really the only two you would want to use in something like this. And in fact, if you were I have a $40 plan. I just went with a real basic Kiro plan, and I used two times the number of credit uses, and I don't even think I got past my free kick the tires tokens or credits. But I did stick with Opus 4.5, and I said, well, let's just see how long it lets me use it. Maybe it dies after a couple of tasks, and then I got to jump over to Sonnet 4.5, and this is just a fun project anyways. So, and then of course, look at this. It'll let you use auto. So, and it only uses one credit. So I guess it's kind of like dealer's choice. The interesting thing is it will probably use Haiku a lot, which I wouldn't recommend. But anyway, looks like it's trying to hit my server. Anyway, so when it got into these tasks, it started out, and if you just kind of expand them, it breaks a main task into subtasks. So we have a 1.1. It gives you a list of what it's going to do. And then, of course, it's an MD file. So if you wanted to, you could go in and change it, retype, hey, don't do this. Now, I don't know what connects. I'm not great at, the Postgres QL servers. I'm not even sure if I'm saying that right. I'm a MySQL guy from a million years ago. And then first, obviously, it's going to start with all the database. So it's building the database, the migrations, and so on. And then I had told it to just, only do the primary tasks. We could have gone just full bore, but I did say skip the, the testing build out. Now I can come back and I can just click start task and it'll get busy on it. So that was interesting, is that it creates these things that it says complete now, but what it does do is it gives you a link, you click on it and it starts just that task. So it's going to do just task 1. And then when it's done, it will let me click start task on number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, and it's all the way down to like 24. And of course, you start to look at these and, this is testing. So honestly, testing inequality. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even hardly anything in here. So let's take a look at 20 or 18. So 18 was the chat interface UI. So it built out the chat interface, implemented message handling, response rendering, and so on. And so it really just chews through this. Now, I did ask at one point, I said, hey, I thought this was one of these things where I could let it run for 30 hours without being involved. Because really all I did as the developer was provide the context prompt and then basically approved everything it asked me. It looked all really good. It's, good enough for me. Let's get this thing going. I'll know it when I see it if I like it, which is a lot of project manager mentality. Is I know what I want and I'll know it when I see it. So I just said yes to all this. Anybody can do this. So far, I haven't written a single line of code in any of this. Now, I did create my EMV file, put my tokens in there, and so on, which are all temporary. But anyway, then so it just completed. It worked off of these 3 documents. It did do some steering documents, product structure and tech. It created documents on how to build or what it wanted to build. Decided to use Docker on my computer, so we set up a Docker container, and then now it's done. So I did have to go out and set up through Google OAuth, and if I come to my charity CRM, now I am logged in. All I've done at this point is get to this screen. I haven't tested it or anything. I mean, I did get the OAuth to work. So you and I are gonna watch and see if this actually worked. Like what did we get out of this? I'm just gonna create an organization. I'm gonna call it my sample foundation. HTTPS example.com 123 main Grand Junction Ohio, whatever. All right, and create. Now, did we get anything? Failed to create organization. All right, so if I look at my console, what happened? Server bad request. So what I'm going to do, as the developer, if depending on my level, like, being a developer, you're on a spectrum of entry level and master. Now, if I were at the level of my other developers that I work with at ClickBid, I would go, oh, look, cool. I'm just going to go like auth sign up. I can go in, look at the API. There's a sign up flag somewhere in there, or there's a sign up endpoint that's not working. So now I can fix that. But I'm either a junior dev or maybe a mid-level dev, and I'm saying, you know what? This is not how I'm going to do it from now on. I'm going to take a screenshot, copy it, and I'm just going to hand it over to Kiro. And I'm going to say, hey, I tried to create my org and got this error. And then paste the screenshot. And then it's going to, include my documents. And and I think what it's doing is it's trying to include those documents as a way to get beyond the, the context memory. So it's trying to use these documents, and you can do a lot of this manually if you want, but Kiro's trying to do it automatically. I didn't create those documents. And so at this point, what I'm doing here, this is very much what it's debugging right now. It's very much what Claude is. So there's no difference in like if I were just sitting here on my terminal running Claude, I would do the same thing, put in the error, ask it what's going on, and then it would go through and it would address it. So Kiro is not what its value is that it's adding a lot of this steering stuff, the tasks. It's building long-term projects. So if you were to hand it from the product manager to say, here's your spec for this product, it'll take it into Kiro, turn it into an entire planning document, and then it'll help you build it. So really what you become is you could technically never write a single line of code anymore. You could be doing this, being the interface between the product manager and Kiro or Gemini CLI or even Codex CLI or Claude CLI. It doesn't, that's really what you're becoming. And you're trying to think as fast as what Claude just did. So Opus 4.5 said, I see the issue, it expects an email, but let me check what the front end is sending. So it decided that it didn't get the email. So it needs first name, last name, email. The back end expects these fields, but the front end doesn't collect them. Now this is interesting. Like as a senior dev, this never would have been a bug. I mean, obviously, if I create a table in a database with a first name, last name, email, well, of course I'm going to, include that on my input form. But for whatever reason, probably in a lack of context, Claude got going and it forgot to put it into the front end. And so if you look back, actually, you can see it didn't even ask me for my name. So now it's going to have to fix that and add it in. So let's see where it's at. let's see, since the backend code is fixed, now let me also update the front end. Let me check the front end is properly sending auth token. Yes, yes, yes. And there's already data in the database. It wants to do some code here. So it's it looks like a query command. Yep. So I'm going to run it. And I could have trusted it, but, and that is something, when you do trust something, it adds it to a, one of these documents. So I'm just going to hit trust, and then I can trust this. I can just trust PSQL in general. So it actually puts it in a auto approve list. So that's kind of cool, is you start to approve commands that it can run without you being around, which is kind of nice if you do trust certain things. I don't care if it blows away my entire database, so that's fine. So now it's actually checking the database to see, hey, who's in here? Do I clearly, you can see here there's no data being added, although my first name and last name is in there, but my email is in there because it got it from the Google OAuth. So there's obviously a disconnect. It got it from the Google OAuth, so it didn't pass it in the form. Didn't need to because it was already there. So now it's asking for it in the back end endpoint. So now they're going to have to figure out how to fix the two. So the database has the statuses you already have. Contact. The issue is that when you're on the sign up page, you're authenticated, but the sign up endpoint wasn't properly using that authenticated user. And now it's up and running. Try submitting the form again. So let's take a look, and let's try it again. My sample charity. And this has been my experience with a lot of agentic coding, is you're just going to continue to run into errors in the beginning, and it's going to slowly start to go away. Yeah, Manon. All right, well, that's fine. Grand Junction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 5. Okay, so anyway, it doesn't matter. Then I hit create. And internal server error. So now we have auth sign up. Looks like sign up page did not handle that. So again, here we are. So my guess is, from thinking about situations that I've had in my past, is that you are going to spend a decent amount of time back and forth with your CRM. So there's a couple options here. I can take a screenshot, which I'm going to do, copy it. But I could also tell, one thing you want is to give Claude access to your, can you check the error logs getting a 500 error on sign up? And so, I can add the screenshot, or I can just tell it, hey, check the logs for the 500 error. And as long as you give it access to tail or to look at any of those, it will. Let's see. In the past, I've been able to do this, and it works just fine. So we're just waiting to see what it gets. Server running on port. Yep, sign up error, insert into. Looks like we have probably a mismatch of data. Yep. Organization, contact relationships does not exist. So now it's going to go through. Now that I know what this is, historically as a programmer, I would have had my logs tailing, and I would have noticed that right away. And I would have said, so now I need to go into the page. I need to go find it in the back end, under the source, my routes, sign up, blah, blah, blah. And I could go find it and fix it. But now I'm allowing Claude to do it. The question is, and what I have never found the answer, or I've never found this to be true yet, is that if I were a full-time developer, would this be happening faster than my full-time developer working on this? And so far, I don't know. I don't feel like it would be. I think my full-time dev, my senior level dev would be like, yeah, I know how to fix this. Is easy. I'll just go in and fix it. And they can go in and fix the query, or they know what they're looking at. And their context window is a lot bigger than Claude. Because if you're not careful, Claude can run you around in circles, and it'll fix something, and then half an hour later, it'll forgot that it fixed it, and then it'll undo some of that. I've noticed that in the past too, where, now I'm going backwards, and I feel like you're just banging your head against the wall. So there is a lot of that frustration. Whereas a senior dev would remember, wait a minute, I can't do that because I just fixed it a while ago. So again, the senior dev's context window is just a lot bigger. So anyway, so it says back end running, try creating an organization. Let's just, for the sake of it, and then we can be done here, but let's just sample org. You do a lot of this, retyping. 123 Main Street. Grand Junction. I don't even know if there is a Grand Junction, Ohio. And create. Organization with this domain already exists. So let's do example 2. So now we've got a problem with that, but at least it's a conflict and it's not, it's not a bug. So, okay, so good. I created my organization. Now it's redirecting you. Select an organization. Well, that didn't work exactly how I wanted. So now, you know what? It actually got to this point. So let's just see. Ask me anything about your donor's gift. So I'd like to create a donor named Peter Parker. And let's see. Well, it didn't exactly come back with anything intelligent, did it? My dog decided that she wanted to drink some water at this exact moment. Did you create the donor? Question mark. And so it looks like we have a problem. It doesn't look like I'm getting responses back from the AI. So now I'd have to start going through and figure out what's going on and why. So again, now as the developer, I now have to then start going through the software, not as a programmer, but as a kind of a debugger QA to say, hey, this doesn't work. And at some point, I'm going to get to enough success that I'll have an MVP. And then the question is, how do I move forward with it? Do I move forward with a full-time dev? Do I continue doing agentic coding and so on? So I think that's kind of where we are, even with Kiro. But Kiro is cool. I think it's got some capabilities that are really nice, especially if I'm able to do this with $40 versus going direct to Claude Max starting at $100. Like I don't know which I don't know which is better. Is AWS subsidizing some of that expense? I don't know, but some very cool stuff. I could have created this with Opus 4.5 in the CLI, so I'm not saying this is a replacement, but some good stuff to it. So, and Kiro is definitely a VS Code fork, so you can probably still install a lot of those plugins if you had them before. So anyway, all right, hope this was helpful, and take it easy.